All right. Good afternoon. My name is Marion Bounds, and I'm the project coordinator in the Military Health Institute, otherwise known as the MHI. I'm speaking today on behalf of Dr. Byron Hepburn, the director of the MHI, as he is not able to be here today. There we go. The mission of the MHI includes 4 focus areas that I'd like to address. One is research, then you have education, clinical advocacy, and engagement. Our goal in every one of these areas is to improve the health and resiliency of our military, our veterans, and their families. To that purpose, the MHI sponsors the Military Health Interest Group, a student-led organization dedicated to that same goal of improving health care for the military. The Military Health Interest Group is open to any and all students interested in military health, and we strongly encourage your participation in this group. We have listed the president's and vice president's names and contact information at the bottom of the slide. Should you wish to join the group or have any questions whatsoever, please contact them. We would also like to mention the 8th annual SURF. SURF stands for the San Antonio Military Health System and Universities Research Forum. This occurs on June the 16th, 2022. It is a research forum that promotes collaboration among academia, military, and industry to improve military health, outcomes, and readiness. Now, I would like to introduce our speaker today. He will address the GME selection process, Dr. Brian Fox. Dr. Fox has a medical degree from Drexel University and has completed his residency at the David Grant Medical Center, as well as a second residency in child neurology at Stanford University. He is a retired colonel with a great deal of military experience and is heavily engaged in graduate medical education. I'm sure you will learn a great deal from Dr. Fox today. May I present Dr. Fox?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brian Fox, and I'm just flipping through a couple of the slides here. So I am retired as of 6 months ago. So the slides I have today are up to date as of 2 weeks ago, as I'm pretty knowledgeable about the folks that run military graduate medical education. And I can speak to regular civilian graduate medical education to a degree also. In my last position, I worked for the Dean of Shawshek, which is the local military medical health education consortium. And then prior to that, I was a program director in the military. So I know everything there is to know about being a resident and how to do so within the military. So please don't hesitate to ask any questions if you have any as we go through this. And so, of course, there is the standard disclaimer. I don't represent the United States government at this point. I am not here on an official basis. And so what I have to say is coming from the United States Air Force primarily, but I'm going to throw in as much Army and Navy as possible. As I said, in my last position, I worked closely with physician education for all 3 services. So the key center of physician education is the military physician education offices. And if you have any questions, I have the websites for each one of the 3 services, Air Force, Army, and Navy later in the talk. But these offices are to go to for understanding what's going on with military GME in particular. So we'll talk a little bit today about how they manage the force, how we oversee our GME pipeline, which we'll explain in a bit. But these folks are the pivotal folks to work with as you're applying for graduate medical education. There's other processes we'll go over today. This office handles the health forecast boards, which for the Air Force, it's called the HPERB, which stands for Health Professions Education Requirements Board. So it's essentially, I'll show some pictures later, how we choose what we want to train. And then on the Army and Navy side, these are called your school year plans. And this is a process by which the services, the Air Force, Army, and Navy, and soon to be Space Force, gives to our offices the demands for we need X type of physician. And our job was always to execute and go and train those types of physicians. After that process, we'll go through the selection board, kind of the ins and outs and what is taken into consideration when we're replacing medical school graduates into graduate medical education. And then from there, this office also coordinates a lot of the working background for the physicians who are finished with training, and so for the faculty. So pretty key group of people. So what is this pipeline? Well, the pipeline essentially is the means by which we bring a person essentially from the lay, off the street, civilian, and to produce them as a military officer and physician. So you're getting trained in two things at once. They are mutually conducive to each other, they're not exclusive. And so this training goes on simultaneously. But this pipeline is really important because it's years long in the making. And I have a lot of Air Force numbers up there. Again, I'm an Air Force retired colonel, so I apologize. I will try to also bring up the Army and Navy as much as possible because the process is very similar. They each have their own GME pipelines. And so we'll talk a little bit about undergraduate medical education, medical school, and then graduate medical education, actually getting into residencies and further training. And so there you can see on the left some of the numbers, 330,000 Air Force members as of this past year, and about almost 10% of them are anytime in training. And that can be any kind of training, not necessarily medical. You got about 60,000 Air Force officers, and then of those, the medical side Air Force officers is about 10,000. So you drop down to like about 5% or somewhere in medicine within the Air Force. And then underneath that, then you have what we call the medical corps. And the medical corps are the actual faculty members and the residents who have finished medical school and are medical doctors working in the military. All of them have to have licensure or to attain it. Interns are the only ones that don't have that licensure, but by law, you have to get that done before you hit your second year. And there you can kind of see the breakdown of our, at least on the Air Force, the medical corps. And the Army and the Navy have a similar type of training pipeline and similar types of training numbers, albeit larger, the Air Force being the smallest. And there you kind of get a sense that to bring someone along this pipeline, it's 7 to 11 years. Longer for residencies like neurosurgery, shorter for residencies like family practice. And so, and this pipeline's in place to replace about 350 physicians that retire, that we call ETS in the Army, leave the service, et cetera. And that's to replace those folks who are passing on to other opportunities. And so there you kind of see that at any point within the Air Force, at least, and the Army and Navy numbers are similar, about 1/3 are in graduate medical education at a time. So this is essential. We can't get all the training needs that we require through civilian training, although we are very creative with that. But the military platforms are very important to keep this pipeline moving. And there you can see it produces 98% of our future doctors, either through one of our scholarship programs like the Health Professions Scholarship Program, HPSP, or through the USHIS itself. And we take in physicians after they finish training, financial assistant program, other programs, but it's only amounts to about 20 to 30 per service per year. So by and large, we've had folks with us for a very long time, up through college in some cases, ROTC, service academies, through to medical school, into active duty, through to retirement. And there on the right, you can kind of see those numbers in greater context. All right, so the pipeline. So for undergraduate, there you can kind of see the breakdowns. When you're in a undergraduate status, at least in the military, you're considered a military service corps officer, not medical corps until you graduate. And so, and there you see we're bringing through about 300 some physicians through HPSP, bringing through another 50 per year of USHIS to enter future residency programs. And so, and folks are coming in year 1 or year 2 into the pipeline, and they're getting either 3 or 4 year scholarships. And so, so USHIS does about 15%, HPSP, very important, does about 85%, and then 98% total come through this pipeline. And so, once you get to GME and the residency side of things, that training is variable, taking some 3 years after training. If you were to do something like graduate medical officer or a flight surgeon, you have shorter amount of training. And folks will call these various names operational medicine programs, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. The categorical residencies, like your classics, like surgery, internal medicine, OB-GYN, et cetera, are the ones that range from that 3 to 7 years in general. And this medical education physician office that I talked about, their primary job is to make sure that all of our programs are accredited under the ACGME, so the Accreditation Council of Graduate Medical Education. So they spend a lot of time on that. And they also spend a lot of time with the LCME, the Licensing Committee for Medical Schools, and also with boards to various degrees. So the office that I worked with spent a lot of time working with civilian counterparts to make sure that our training was at the standard, if not surpassing that of civilian counterparts. And so, and as you can see there, completion of residency training qualifies you for your board certification in your specialty. So for example, on pediatrics and separate board neurology, qualified. And as I like to say, I was a program director and an associate dean, and I was a resident for 6 years. So I know what it means to be a resident for a long time, but you need that training to be completed to be board certified in that specialty. And the desire, particularly speaking for the Air Force, is that everyone gets their residency training. All right, fellowships add even more time. So fellowships range anywhere from 1 year up to 3 years typically. And that, again, you can see how lengthy that pipeline gets to be. Is there? Yep, thank you. And what we've been seeing over time is that more and more fellowships are popping up. And we, as a service, Army, Navy, Air Force, Space Force, may not have a particular need for a particular specialty, but a lot of times we do, and that need is projected through what we call that school year plan or that HPERB, Health Professions Forecast Board. And so, again, all of our fellowships, if they have accredited, they're accredited, et cetera. And so, okay. So residency and physician training, we have our own platforms within the military that train the majority of the Army, Navy, Air Force. The Air Force is the one that tends to be a little bit more civilian liaisons with than the other services. And what these centers do, and they're spread throughout the country, and I'll show you some representative pictures, they ensure that we have the currency and the competency that we need to carry out military missions throughout the world. And that is very unique to us. It isn't necessarily going to be civilian-based care. It's going to be care in austere environments a lot of times. I spent many a time, wishing I could do something, and I'm in a different country, so having to think about how I would do it there without the support or medications or skill sets that I needed. So part of the training that our trainees go through is just that, how to do this in an austere environment, changing that context. And so we do a lot of our own training just for that, for enculturation, making sure that folks know what it means to be an officer and a physician at the same time. So a lot is done within our own centers. And we also do a lot of significant research, particularly here in San Antonio. I can speak to like the SURF conference coming up. A lot of time is spent on trauma care, bleeding control, infectious diseases, critical care transports, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's differences throughout the regime, throughout the realm of specialties. So like my own, and when I was active duty pediatrics, how do you care for a child, humanitarian emergencies? And we've done research in those areas. And so all of the purpose of these programs at the graduate medical education level is to support the operational mission. And so here's an example of where programs are located for the Air Force. I oversaw Shawshank, the one here in San Antonio. We had 36 training programs. We had allied health, folks like physical therapy, psychology, and then we had the regular graduate medical education, the surgeries, internal medicine, et cetera. And there you can kind of see the breakdown of where places are. So as you're going through the process of applying to residency programs, whether it be civilian or military, I would definitely urge you to know these details, where are potential places at. By and far for the Air Force, the major platforms here in San Antonio, we have a lot of military here, and you have a military health interest group, for example, which is rare when you look across civilian centers. So it's largely because of this partnership and what's here in the local area. Other big places, Wright-Patterson, Travis Air Force Base, National Consortium. And speaking of the National Consortium, as far as total number of residents and fellows, that is the largest for the military. And there, it is not the largest for overall Air Force. That would be here in San Antonio. And then the Navy has similar centers like Portsmouth and Balboa, yeah, et cetera. And so in the Army, again, Tacoma, Washington, et cetera, with Madigan. So the Air Force has started to partner, the Army has started to partner, the Navy has partners, but these are some examples of operational medicine platforms, meaning the OEM stands for Operational Emergency Medicine, Operational Family Medicine, and these are emergency medicine programs that are specifically geared to creating emergency physicians or family physicians that are also able to be flight surgeons. So part of their training is based around that. But I just wanted to show it just to kind of see the unique opportunities that go on. And then we do take a lot of folks that do these dual tracks, learning family med, internal med, emergency med, and even pediatrics, and then they go into flight surgery for a while. Then they come back to their primary specialty if they desire. And so there's also further consolidation. Here's general surgery. There is a high demand from the services that say we need surgery. How are we going to get there? And there is also a consolidation of military medical resources and something called the DHA, which is the Defense Health Agency. They are not the services, but what the DHA is a overall organizational body that oversees graduate medical education. And there you can kind of see some of the centers that the services, Army, Navy, Air Force, are working with to provide experiences in general surgery. All right, so that's the background. So how does this actually happen? How do we pick people? How do we get them in the programs? And then how does that affect you as applying to these programs? The timeline's important. So right now, you can see on the bottom there that forecast board, both for the Army, Navy, Air Force is going on. And I can tell you probably what they want is more surgeons, more emergency medicine, more anesthesia. They're putting in their requirements and with us very focused on making sure that we're ready to go anywhere in the world. One of the impetuses, for example, on the Air Force side is we want more folks to be able to do rapid evacuations and transport and something called CCAT. So you're going to need a lot of flight surgeons to do that, a lot of emergency medicine folks to potentially do that, and a lot of ICU folks. So when they're looking at this February, March timeframe, they're putting in a lot of requirements for ICU physicians, for example, just based upon that mission that comes down from the Secretary of Defense. So through this process, you can kind of follow the timeline. They will publish on that physician education website what the services want. And so you can kind of take a look and see what they want. And there has not been a significant change over the years. And the other thing, so I was pediatrics, and it was always felt, you know, maybe we don't need this as much, but there has been no change largely over my 15 years in these numbers. There's been absolutely no change with regards to some of the other specialties. So you can do what you want. You just have to, you know, really apply yourself during the process of the application, make yourself out there. And I'll have some further tips on that. But once we make the forecast and then we sit down, materials are due, again, in your fourth year, you have to have your applications in, and going to the websites, following the applications to the T is important, knowing about that. And then there's the board, which meets earlier in the year. There you can see the scoring board, where internally we as the tri-services get together and we score packages in as an objective method as possible, which I'll go into the scoring rubric. And then November, we have the finalization of the scores, and then we release the results before the new year. So sometime in mid-December. So that's well ahead of civilian match, which happens in March. And so, all right, so this micro print on this slide essentially is the HPERB school year plan. This one happens to be for the Air Force. Above on the columns, you can see the sites where they're having things. The numbers are how many of those things they want specialty-wise in those places. So for example, aeromedical services, it's only residencies only at Wright-Patterson, so you're only going to see numbers in that column. And that's how you read it down through the specialties. But it's a robust list of specialties. If the services don't train it, they don't have that program, they'll train it in the civilian sector. And a lot of times they can be of two different flavors. A civilian deferred, which means you go, you're just like a civilian, you do what you want, and then civilian sponsored, you're active duty, but working in a civilian center. And so, and a lot of times, a lot of folks want those civilian sponsored because you're earning time towards payback of your obligation, and also because you can put that in towards retirement. And having been retired, I can tell you it's wonderful as you start your second life in a whole nother career. So there you can kind of see some more of the numbers. And every year, as this comes out, it'll be posted. You can go to the physician education websites of the various services and see what exactly is being projected for the year upon which you would graduate from medical school and be going into residency. So once we get through projecting, then we get into matching, and this is the process. So as I mentioned, these physician education offices are interested in how this match happens. They're also interested in how the civilian match happens, because we do train people through civilian centers. And so we have to know this, and we work closely with ERAS system, National Residency Match Program, and then the AOA correlate to that. And so here's kind of a guide that shows that you complete your application in what they call the mods, which is the military version of ERAS. You complete your application in ERAS as well. And the various services may or may not utilize ERAS. And so years ago, the Army moved away from it. So they might have everything through mods, but again, that website's going to show you which system to apply into. The Air Force, you're going to be both, because our training is a lot of times, if you don't match on the Air Force military platform side, then you go to the civilian side. And then there you can kind of see how it rolls down from there. And again, the match happens in the military prior to civilian. So, and I remember back from my time, I was interviewing at Emory Children's, but I was pretty sure, and I was open with them saying, I think I'm going to probably end up matching to the military, and I did out in California. So that would be an example of having your foot kind of in both systems, and then pulling your foot out of the civilian system as the military would pick you up for their training. These are your civilian education websites, the Navy, the Army, and the Air Force. I check them. They are legitimate and working. And then for the Air Force, for example, they all look very similar on their pages. They have the explicit details about how to put in your application. It spells it out from A to Z. And then it gives you all the required documents. And again, read all of this. It's very important. Read it in advance. It pays to be very organized. And as a former program director, I can tell you, you will do well if you're organized. And then it gets into, once your application's in, then it's the scoring. So how do we score people? How does this process work? Essentially, it favors the organized and the proactive, and those who are really making an effort. So we really want to see folks, go out of their way to be proactive, contacting places, even to a place you don't think you would end up, still contact them, because all of these places are in communication with each other in the military. So, but put your best foot forward, work on your interview skills. And then a lot of times, it was limited during the COVID, but during a lot of times, you're going to be doing audition rotations as it is at various sites. I would gear those towards the ones you want to go to. The same could be said in the civilian centers. If it's not as common as the military, these types of rotations, but you can do them in your third year if you have the time. A lot of times you don't, or you don't know what you want to do, but definitely in your fourth year early on, you want to set these rotations up to be prepared. Meet the people, talk to the people. It all goes a long way. As far as the scoring goes, and so it is a fair process, fairly applied, is what we say. Sometimes it doesn't make sense, but we try to keep it as honest as possible. There's always caveats and alibis. So one of them often is per regulation joint spouse. So if you have someone that's applying with military, we're going to match them together, try to keep them in the same place or near the same place, et cetera. There's other compassionate assignments. And they're really usually quite compassionate. Such as family members dying would like to be located next to them, because of that significant reason. And so those kind of come out first, and then those folks are taken care of. And then the rest of the process is is a fairly applied, and it's not just the service themselves, like Air Force for Air Force. It would be Navy, Army reviewing third-party Air Force applications and vice versa. So it is not something where you would have someone that could skew the system. And in fact, there's checks and balances that if one score through this process is too far off, that has to be adjudicated and you have to fix it essentially. So there come to some type of agreement. And so through my years of having seen this done, first in person, then virtually, this has been fairly applied. And so these applications come in, interview sheets, we call them, come in, dean's letters, various board pass fails come in, et cetera. And essentially, the scoring process happens. The scoring system is based upon the years in training. And so for medical students, which is the biggest population, the scores end up being actually really fairly close because there you can kind of see the point spread isn't that much. So oftentimes it's a whole bunch of people that scored evenly, and it's always geared towards what is the best interest of that particular applicant. So not what is the program's want. It is geared towards what's the best match for that applicant. And having been a program director, I want happy residents coming in. I don't want dissatisfied. And by and large, it does a really good job of trying to find people to the right spot. And that's what we want. And so that's basically the scoring system. Obviously, if you were a medical student competing against someone in the field person's going to get more points. And to help equalize this a little bit, they went to a percent of the possible total, and using that percentile kind of evened it out a little bit more for the medical students versus someone who's just been out and about in the active duty. And so, but that's how it works. I would say for the medical students, the biggest things are those dean's letters, particularly now. We hadn't used board scores all that much, but step one's now pass fail. You know, a lot of times step two scores may or may not be back by the time this happens. But it's going to be the dean's letters. It's going to be the interview. It's going to be the rotation. And then a lot of times these make or break +1 type things are always going to be, has that person done any research publications, peer reviewed journals being higher than publication, but nonetheless, we'll still give some points for publications. And so all of this, there's more to it, but that's it in a nutshell. We're added together so we get our scores. You get the scores, and then we have the desires of the person, and based upon that rack and stack, they figure out what does first person want, what does second person want, third person. That's how it works. So, and all of this is overseen by the various generals who oversee the medical corps and show. So my words of advice: clerkships, these rotations you do at military sites, make them count. And so remember, you are an officer and a physician at the same time. So, you know, get off your handheld devices, show some interest, be proactive, look at your learning. What can I learn? How can I improve? Asking these kinds of questions to the residents and to the attendings is pretty important. Get to know the people and the programs that you're interested in, and these same things apply on the civilian side. Ask your questions, be who you are, because I can tell you the residents who are there in the programs are very savvy at figuring out people. And so, but be who you are, try not to be something you're not. And, you know, it's okay. You know, everyone doesn't have a spectacular day. It's okay. It's the overall summation of what you've done that matters most to these programs. And so, and then, yeah, consider upwriting case reports. You can do extra presentations so we can kind of see how you communicate, how you think, how's your logic. That's what the attendings are looking for. And so, interview while you were there, make sure that gets set up, and most programs are geared towards that. And so, and just remember, medicine is a team effort. So, you know, we do a lot of 360 evaluations or focal evaluations, like how did that person interact with X, Y, or Z. And so, and then as always, you can always ask, that stands for Surgeon General Consultants, advice about particular career fields. Every specialty has one of those folks, consultants. So how else to be successful? So as I said, those dean's letters now with step one kind of being, pass fail, and it's not a number, and it never really was all that important as a number. The dean's letters have always been and the rotations have been the two most important things. And so talk to people, get your mentors, reach out for people, get your application in a timely fashion, read all of those websites and ask questions. And so here's the results from the last 5 years, 2016 through 2020. And there you can see the number of applicants, number of MD versus DO, and the percent selected. So some programs are going to be more selective or limited, such as ophthalmology. And then some are going to be a little bit easier, like family medicine or internal medicine, their selections. And so mainly because we need a lot of those kinds of folks. And so, but these requirements for why do you have these programs were set because the service needs that particular program. So here's just for your reference or step scores. Again, step 1 has become pass fail. And there you can see step 2s. Okay. For what it's worth. Again, me as a program director, I can tell you step scores, as long as you pass, I've passed them. I really didn't pay them much attention. I was more cued into how your performance was in the long haul in those dean's letters. Complex scores for osteopaths for reference. You can look at those. And that's it. I'm going to just turn it over if you all have any questions, and then let's go from there.
Okay.
Yeah. So feel free to ask. If not, then have a great day, but I'll just open it up if anyone has any questions. All right. Okay. All right. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay.
So.
And I know y'all really enjoyed this presentation by Dr. Fox. I know you learned a great deal too. So if you do have questions or you'd like to maybe perhaps a copy of his briefing, if possible, contact Shawitha Prabhakar and Aaron Sanchez on this last slide here, and they'll be happy to get it to you. All right. Thank you again for attending.